I guess you could say that my life was pretty typical. I was married to Claire, my high school sweetheart, for nearly a decade. We had a decent life together, 2 kids, a cozy house in the suburbs, and the usual ups and downs that come with any long-term relationship. I thought we were solid, but the cracks started to appear when Claire began her new job at a local marketing firm. I just brushed it off at first, thinking it was nothing more than the typical work-related stress that comes with a new position. But then, things began to change. Claire was always more distant. She started coming home late from work, saying she had meetings or was caught up with projects. I remember the first time she came home after midnight. I was worried, but she assured me it was just a late meeting and I let it slide. At first, I believed her. After all, it's the least you can do in a marriage, right? Trust your partner. But as weeks went by, I noticed little things. Changes in her behavior, her phone usage. It became a constant source of curiosity. She was suddenly very protective of her phone, often texting or on calls in another room. If I entered, she'd quickly switch screens like a teenager caught playing video games when they should be studying. I began to feel like an outsider in my own home. Then one evening, while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone. My curiosity got the better of me. I rationalized it as a simple check. I thought maybe I could ease my mind and find a text from her boss about the project she was working on. Instead, I found messages between her and none other than my high school bully, Jake. I still remember him, the guy who used to shove me into lockers and call me names. I couldn't believe it. They were flirting back and forth, discussing meeting up, and even sending some very intimate messages. My heart sank. I felt an icy grip of betrayal wrap around my chest. I dropped the phone and it clattered to the floor. Claire rushed out, dripping wet, and the look on her face changed instantly when she saw the phone. I didn't need to say anything. The silence between us spoke volumes. "Jason, it's not what it looks like," she exclaimed, wrapping a towel around herself and trying to snatch the phone from my hands. She was panicking, her eyes wide with fear. "What is it then, Claire? Because it looks like you're having an affair with my high school bully," I shot back, my voice shaking with anger. She fumbled for words, her excuses tumbling out in a way that felt rehearsed. "He's just a friend. We've been catching up over old times. You know how it is. It doesn't mean anything," she pleaded. But those words felt hollow. I wanted to believe her, but I was standing there with the proof right in my hands. Her betrayal was as real as the water dripping onto the hardwood floor. I felt the anger boiling inside me, the hurt turning into a fury that I had never known before. As she tried to explain herself, the real emotional weight of it all crashed down on me. I started to feel like I was losing myself. I had devoted a decade to this woman, and in return, she was giving her body to the guy who made my high school life hell. I was stuck between disbelief and sheer rage. I didn't want to hear her excuses, but I needed to know how far this had gone. And what hurt more was how casually she dismissed my pain, thinking I would just accept her pathetic justifications. The confrontation spiraled into a hostile exchange. She was defensive, insisting she hadn't actually cheated, that it was just emotional. But what was emotional infidelity if not cheating? My mind was racing. I kept picturing Jake's smug face and how he had always looked down on me. I could feel something dark brewing inside me, a desire for revenge that began to take root with every lie she uttered. With my world crumbling and the anger boiling, I made a silent vow. I would not just sit back and let this slide. If she thought she could have her cake and eat it too, she had another thing coming. I needed to formulate a plan, something that would ensure I outclassed both of them in life, career, and revenge. I was done being the victim. I had a family to protect, a life to rebuild, and I was ready to make my next move. After that confrontation, I was in a daze. I spent the night tossing and turning, replaying every moment in my mind. Claire had fallen asleep in the guest room, leaving me in our once happy space, now tainted by betrayal. I couldn't believe that I felt more alone than ever, even with her just a wall away. The next day, I went to work like a zombie. I couldn't focus on anything. Each email, each meeting, felt so trivial compared to what was going on in my life. I found it hard to concentrate on projects I once cared about. My colleagues noticed something was off, but I brushed off their concern with half-hearted excuses. That day, I decided to dig deeper. I needed to confirm exactly what was going on between Claire and Jake. I started by looking through her social media. I checked her messages and posts, searching for any clues that might indicate the extent of their relationship. The more I looked, the more disgusted I felt. I saw photos of them together at a bar, an innocuous-looking gathering that was actually filled with hidden meanings. They were laughing, sharing drinks, and there it was, the unmistakable intimacy that should have been reserved for just us. Each snapshot felt like a dagger to my heart, twisting deeper with every glance. I realized I couldn't just sit back and wallow in sadness. I needed to act. I began to think about how I could turn the tables on both of them. Revenge wasn't just about retribution, it was about reclaiming my power. I decided to start working on myself. First, I focused on my career. I knew I had potential that I had buried under the weight of our marriage. I started putting in extra hours at work, impressing my boss with my dedication. I had recently been passed over for a promotion, but I was determined to change that narrative. I began networking, attending industry events, and engaging with others in my field. The more I invested in my career, the more I felt a sense of accomplishment creeping back into my life. I watched as my colleagues began to take notice of my hard work. I even started getting compliments. The praise reminded me of my worth outside of my marriage, something I had lost sight of during the years of complacency. But while I was busy building my confidence and professional reputation, I couldn't completely shake off the anger I felt towards Claire and Jake. I started planning subtle ways to get under their skin. I made it a point to let Claire see my transformation. I hit the gym, shed some pounds, and started dressing sharper. I wanted her to see what she was missing and how I was evolving without her. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home and found Claire on the couch browsing her phone. I decided to make myself presentable to her. I wore my best suit, a reminder of the man she had chosen to betray. I sat down beside her, my heart racing with the thrill of the game I was playing. "Hey, you look different," she said, her tone mixed with surprise and a hint of jealousy. "Yeah, I've decided to focus on me," I replied, a smirk creeping across my face. "Work has been going really well. I'm actually in the running for a big promotion." Her expression shifted, and I could see a flicker of fear in her eyes. "That's great, Jason. I'm happy for you," she said, but I could sense the insincerity in her voice. I knew I was getting to her. Every time I made advancements in my life, it would eat away at her. I wanted her to feel the regret of losing me, of choosing a petty fling over a solid partnership. I also wanted her to see Jake for what he truly was, a loser who had only found success in bullying me, but who would fade into the background once the novelty of their affair wore off. As I continued to work on myself, I also started gathering intel on Jake. A few of my old friends were still in touch with him. I reached out to one of them, casually bringing up the topic and asking about Jake's life. He filled me in on Jake's recent endeavors and how he was struggling in his own career. It was then that I realized Jake was not the golden boy he once pretended to be. He was just as lost as Claire was, clinging onto their affair as a way to feel relevant in a life that was otherwise mundane. With this information, I started to build the perfect plan. I would not only show Claire that I had moved on, but I would also ensure that Jake's failure would be apparent to everyone, especially to Claire. It was time for me to take control of this situation and flip the narrative. As I plotted the next steps, I felt a growing confidence within me. I was ready to ensure that both Claire and Jake would regret their choices. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was determined to outclass them in every way possible. I would turn this pain into power, and I would do it on my terms. As the weeks went by, I became more focused and driven in my quest for personal revenge. I threw myself into my work and my fitness routine. It was almost like I was sculpting a new version of myself, one that didn't just want to survive but thrive. My colleagues were starting to notice the transformation. I was gaining compliments, accolades, and a growing reputation as someone who was capable and driven. But in the midst of my personal growth, I kept a close eye on Claire and Jake. I had developed a sort of twisted sense of satisfaction watching their connection unfold, all while meticulously planning my next move. They were spending more time together, and I learned that Claire had even started going out with Jake on weekends. It felt like a slap to the face, but I was no longer the weak man who would wallow in that pain. Instead, I used it as fuel to stoke the fire of my revenge. One day, while working late, I received a message from my friend who had been giving me updates on Jake. He mentioned that Jake was struggling at his job and had recently started getting into trouble for slacking off and being late. It struck me. This was the perfect opportunity to set my plan in motion. I reached out to my former boss, who now ran a competing firm. I casually mentioned Jake's name and how I had heard he was struggling. My boss seemed interested, and I took that as my opening. I hinted at Jake's lack of work ethic, suggesting that he might not be the best fit for their team. I knew it was a dirty move, but I didn't care. I wanted him to feel the weight of failure, to see the reality of his life as the facade he had built around Claire crumbled. As the days turned into weeks, I continued to build my career and my reputation. I secured that promotion I had been eyeing, and my boss even praised my work ethic in front of the entire office. I couldn't help but glance at Claire during that meeting, watching her mask the embarrassment on her face when my name was called. I savored the moment, but with success came curiosity. I wanted to see how far Claire and Jake had taken their relationship. I devised a plan that felt both daring and risky. I would confront them together. I arranged for a casual outing with some mutual friends under the guise of catching up. I invited Claire, but I also invited Jake, knowing all too well how desperate he was for attention. The night of the outing arrived, and I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. My heart raced as I walked into the bar where we agreed to meet. Claire was already there, chatting with a few friends. When she saw me, her smile faltered just a fraction, and I knew she felt the tension in the air. Jake arrived shortly after, swaggering in with that obnoxious confidence that always made my skin crawl. I could tell he thought he was charming, that he was still the alpha male in the room. I greeted him with a tight smile, suppressing the urge to show my disdain. As the night progressed, I watched Claire and Jake interact. It was sickening to see how she flirted with him, laughing at his jokes and leaning in closer than necessary. The anger bubbled beneath the surface, but I kept my cool. I was not going to let them see how much this hurt me. Instead, I leaned into the camaraderie of our friends, making sure to engage with them while stealing glances at the two of them. Then, at the perfect moment, I decided to throw a curveball. I stood up and raised my glass, proposing a toast. To old friends, I began, eyeing both Claire and Jake. To new beginnings and the people who inspire us to be better. I could see the confusion on Claire's face. She knew the toast wasn't just a random sentiment. Jake smirked, clearly not picking up on the deeper meaning. He raised his glass in response. "Yeah, to old friends," he echoed, completely oblivious to the tension thickening in the air. After the toast, I made my move. I casually mentioned to everyone about Jake's recent work struggles, framing it as a light-hearted joke but with an edge of seriousness. "I hear you've been taking a lot of days off, buddy," I said, my tone laced with sarcasm. "What's going on with that?" The room went silent, and I could see the blood drain from Jake's face. Claire shot me a look that could have set the building on fire, but I pressed on. "I mean, with your charm and all, I think your boss would want to keep you around." The laughter that followed was not just amusement. It was the kind of laughter that felt like a dagger to Jake's pride. I could feel the tension rising as Jake stammered for a response, trying to save face. He laughed nervously, but it was clear he was caught off guard. Claire, meanwhile, was fuming, her cheeks flushed. I found it incredibly satisfying to watch her discomfort as I turned the tables on them. I knew I had struck a nerve, and it made me feel powerful. In that moment, I realized I was no longer the victim. I had taken back control, and it felt exhilarating. As the night went on, I could see the cracks in their facade beginning to show. I was no longer just some guy who had been wronged. I was a man who had found his strength. I was determined to outclass both of them and make my mark, and I was enjoying every moment of it. The night ended with a series of awkward exchanges, and I left the bar feeling lighter. I was on a mission, and no one was going to stop me. The games had begun, and I was ready to play to win. After that night at the bar, I felt like I had finally gained the upper hand. I had turned the narrative from one of shame and betrayal into one of confidence and empowerment. I continued to focus on my career and personal development, working out, networking, and even taking up new hobbies. I joined a local basketball league, which not only helped me stay fit but also allowed me to connect with new people. It was refreshing to engage with others who didn't know my past. It felt like a clean slate. Meanwhile, Claire was beginning to show signs of desperation. Her once casual flirtations with Jake seemed to lose their luster. I noticed her demeanor change. She was more anxious and often found herself glued to her phone, waiting for messages from someone who had begun to feel like a liability rather than a source of excitement. I had already planted the seeds of doubt in her mind, but I knew I could do more. My next move was to involve some of our mutual friends in a way that would make her question her choices. One friend in particular, Sarah, had always been close to both of us. I reached out to her, letting her know what was happening between Claire and Jake. Sarah was shocked, but she was also fiercely loyal. I explained that I wanted her to casually bring up the affair in front of Claire, to open her eyes to the reality of what was happening. A few days later, we met for lunch. I could hardly contain my excitement. I watched as Sarah and Claire laughed and shared stories, but I could see Claire's facade beginning to crack. Sarah strategically steered the conversation towards relationships, and then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, she brought up the subject of fidelity. "Claire, have you heard anything about Jake lately?" she asked, her tone casual but with an underlying bite. "I know he's been a bit of a hot topic around here. I heard he's not doing so well at work." Claire's face paled. "What do you mean?" she replied, her eyes darting around as if she were searching for an escape. "Oh, just the usual gossip," Sarah continued, feigning indifference. "People are saying he's been slacking off and having issues with management. It's a shame, really. He was such a good guy in high school, but things change, right?" I felt a surge of satisfaction as I watched the panic flicker in Claire's expression. Sarah expertly painted a picture of Jake as someone who was failing, not the confident guy Claire had been drawn to. I could see her internal conflict as she processed this information. The doubts were creeping in, and I felt like I was winning. Later that night, Claire returned home, and I could tell something was off. She was quieter than usual, her mind clearly racing. I had a decision to make. Would I confront her again or let her stew in her doubts? I opted for the latter, wanting to relish in the tension I had created. Days went by, and the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly tense. Claire would often retreat to her phone or her computer, visibly anxious whenever I walked into the room. It was like a game of cat and mouse. She didn't want to confront me about the affair, but I could tell it was weighing heavily on her mind. Then one evening she came home later than usual. I was in the living room watching TV when she walked in, her face pale and drawn. I turned off the television, sensing this was the moment I had been waiting for. "Where have you been?" I asked, keeping my tone steady but firm. "I was out with friends," she replied, avoiding eye contact. "Right, friends." I paused, letting the tension hang in the air. "And Jake?" Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, and I could see the guilt etched on her face. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean, Claire. This whole facade is falling apart. I can't keep pretending that everything's fine while you're out there with him," I said, my voice steady but filled with underlying anger. She opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. "Don't give me your excuses. You've betrayed my trust, and it's time you own up to it." Claire's defenses fell away, and for the first time I saw her vulnerability. "Jason, please let me explain," she began, but I interrupted again. "No, Claire. You don't get to explain. You've made your choices, and I can see the impact they've had on our family. This isn't just about you and Jake. This affects our kids, our lives. Do you even care?" Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment I felt a flicker of sympathy, but I quickly squashed it down. I was done feeling sorry for her. "You need to face the reality of what you've done. This isn't just a phase or a mistake. You've been unfaithful, and you need to decide what you want moving forward." The confrontation left Claire rattled. I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she struggled to find the right words. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of power and sadness. I was finally standing up for myself, but the reality of our situation was still painful. As the days turned into weeks, she started to change. She was more withdrawn and began to realize the full extent of the mess she had created. I watched as she struggled to maintain the connection with Jake while trying to repair our relationship. But it was clear to me that she was losing interest in him, and I was determined to keep the pressure on. I wanted her to feel the consequences of her actions, but I also wanted her to view me as someone who had risen above the situation. I began to think about the future. My career was on the rise. I was finally gaining confidence, and I was ready to set myself up for success. I knew that whatever happened next with Claire, I had already won the first battle. I was reclaiming my life, and no matter how this played out, I would come out on top. The taste of revenge was sweet, and I was ready to see it through to the end. I just needed to keep the momentum going and ensure that she was reminded of her choices every step of the way. As weeks passed, the tension in our home reached a boiling point. Claire was in a constant state of anxiety, flitting between guilt for her actions and resentment towards me for not accepting her excuses. I had drawn a line in the sand, and I refused to back down. I was playing my cards carefully, ensuring I took the right steps toward reclaiming my life while allowing her space to realize the gravity of her decisions. While I was busy building my career and personal life, I also thought about our kids. They were the most important part of my life, and I wanted to shield them from the fallout of our crumbling marriage. I made a point to spend quality time with them, taking them to the park, playing games, and being the dad I had always aimed to be. I wanted them to see a strong father figure, someone who was capable and resilient even in tough times. One evening, while I was preparing dinner, Claire walked into the kitchen. She looked worn out, her eyes shadowed with fatigue and stress. "Jason, we need to talk," she finally said, her voice shaky. I set down the knife I was using to chop vegetables and turned to face her. "I think we both know what we need to talk about," I replied, keeping my tone calm. I was ready for this conversation to take a serious turn, but I had no idea how much it would shake me to the core. "I want to be honest," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about my choices. I realize now that what I did was wrong, and I want to fix things. I want to work on our marriage." The words hung in the air between us, an olive branch that felt both hopeful and dangerous. I could see the wear of guilt etched into her features. Part of me wanted to believe her, to think that maybe this was a genuine epiphany. But the other part of me, the part that was still smarting from the betrayal, was reluctant. "Fixing things doesn't come with a magic wand, Claire," I replied, my voice steady but firm. "It's going to take time and effort on both sides. You've hurt me deeply, and it's not going to be easy to rebuild that trust." She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "I know. I messed up with Jake, and I never should have let it go as far as it did. I was chasing something I thought I wanted, but I see now that I was running away from what I had with you." Her words felt like a double-edged sword. I wanted to believe her, but I also wanted to protect my heart. "You need to understand that this won't just go away overnight," I warned her. "You'll need to prove to me that you're committed to making things right." Claire took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I'll do whatever it takes, Jason. I want to be the wife you deserve. I've been talking to a therapist about my choices, and I see the patterns that led me to this point. I want to change, for us, for our kids." I appreciated her willingness to seek help. It was a step in the right direction, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. "It's going to take time, Claire. I need to see you make an effort, and I need you to be honest with yourself and with me moving forward." We spent the next few weeks navigating this new chapter. Claire started therapy, and I could see glimpses of the woman I had fallen in love with resurfacing. She began to take more responsibility for her actions, and I noticed her putting effort into our relationship, small gestures, like surprising me with my favorite meal or planning family outings that included the kids. But with every step forward, there was still an underlying tension. I found myself reflecting on the affair and how it had impacted me. While Claire was trying to mend things, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed closure on the whole situation. The thought of Jake hung heavily in the air, a lingering presence that threatened to overshadow any progress we made. One day, I decided it was time to confront that lingering tension head-on. I reached out to Jake, knowing that he was still in contact with Claire. I framed it as a casual message, pretending to be reaching out to reconnect. To my surprise, he responded quickly, eager to meet up. I suggested a coffee at a nearby cafe and he agreed without hesitation. When the day arrived, I walked into the cafe, my heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and purpose. I spotted Jake sitting at a corner table, looking just as smug as ever. I approached him calmly, forcing a smile that I hoped hid my true feelings. "Hey, Jake," I said, taking a seat across from him. "Thanks for meeting up." "Sure, man, what's up?" he replied, his cocky demeanor showing through. I took a breath, preparing myself for what I was about to say. "I just wanted to clear the air. I know about you and Claire." He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "Yeah, I figured you did." I could feel my anger rising, but I kept my cool. "You might think this is all fun and games, but you need to understand the impact your actions have had. This isn't just a casual fling. You've hurt my family and I won't stand for it." He shrugged, barely fazed by my words. "Look, man, it was just a good time. Claire was into it, and so was I. Nothing wrong with that, right?" The casual dismissal of our lives felt like a slap in the face. "You're wrong, Jake. This is about more than just you two having a good time. You've manipulated her, and now she's struggling to pick up the pieces. I'm not going to let you just walk away from this without facing the consequences." I could sense his demeanor shifting, the cockiness starting to fade. "What do you want from me?" he asked, the bravado slipping. "I want you to leave us alone. No more texting, no more calls. If you truly care about Claire, you'll respect our family and give her the space she needs to figure things out," I said, leaning in slightly. His expression darkened as he realized I wasn't bluffing. "You think you can control her? She's an adult, man. If she wants to be with me, she will." I locked eyes with him, feeling the weight of the moment. "Let me remind you, Jake, Claire may have made a mistake, but that doesn't define who she is. You're the loser in this situation, and I'm taking back my power. You need to realize that this isn't just a game you can win." After an uncomfortable silence, he finally nodded, albeit begrudgingly. "Fine, I won't reach out anymore, but don't think this is over." I stood up, feeling a rush of triumph. "It is for me," I replied, walking away with a sense of closure. I felt lighter, knowing I had confronted the root of the problem and made it clear that Claire and I were moving on, regardless of his presence. When I returned home, Claire was waiting for me, her eyes filled with concern. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice tense. "It's done," I replied, feeling oddly at peace. "I told him to stay away and he agreed." Her expression softened, relief washing over her face. "Thank you for doing that. I know this has been hard on you." I nodded, knowing that while we still had a long way to go, we had taken another step forward. Slowly but surely, I could feel the foundations of trust being rebuilt, and it gave me hope. The path ahead was uncertain, but as long as we were committed to working together, I believed we could overcome the storm that had threatened to tear us apart. I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, determined to emerge stronger than ever. After that confrontation with Jake, things began to change. The tension in our home started to ease, and Claire and I slowly began to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy, but the effort was palpable. We both knew that the road ahead would require patience, communication, and a willingness to forgive. There were difficult moments, but we faced them together, and it felt like a step in the right direction. Claire continued her therapy, and I could see how much she was growing. She was learning to confront her insecurities and the root causes of her actions. I was proud of her for taking responsibility, but I also made it clear that I needed time and space to process my own feelings. I encouraged her to be open with me about her progress and any lingering doubts she had regarding our relationship. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, we sat down on the couch together. The air was filled with a new sense of hope. "I know I hurt you, Jason," Claire began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want you to know how much I regret my decisions. I'm committed to making this work, and I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust back." I appreciated her honesty, but I also knew that trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. "I want to believe you, Claire. I replied, looking deep into her eyes. But it's going to take time. I need to see consistent efforts from you, not just words. She nodded, her gaze unwavering. I understand. I'm ready to show you. I want to create a new foundation for our relationship, one that's built on honesty and respect. We began to create new traditions together. We scheduled regular date nights, just the two of us, and dedicated time to connect without the distractions of our busy lives. We also made time for family activities, ensuring our kids witnessed us working as a team. It was amazing to see how much joy it brought us to reconnect and share laughter in the midst of our struggles. But the true test came when we decided to spend a weekend away together without the kids. We booked a cabin in the mountains, hoping to reconnect on a deeper level. The surroundings were beautiful, and as we sat by the fire that first evening, I felt a sense of peace settling between us. Thank you for being willing to give us this chance, Claire said softly, her face illuminated by the firelight. I know I've messed up, but I want to show you that I'm committed to us. I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the fire and her words wrapping around me like a blanket. It means a lot to me that you're putting in the effort. I want to make this work too. That weekend was transformative. We talked for hours, discussing everything from our dreams to our fears. I shared my feelings of betrayal, and Claire opened up about her insecurities. We laughed, we cried, and I felt our bond strengthening with every conversation. As the weekend came to an end, I realized that while the scar of her infidelity would remain, it didn't have to define our future. We had both grown from the experience, and I was starting to see the possibility of a new beginning. Upon returning home, I decided to take a step that symbolized my commitment to moving forward. I shifted my focus from revenge to building a future. I approached my boss about a potential promotion that would require relocating. Our conversation quickly turned into an opportunity that would elevate my career and provide us with a fresh start. When I shared the news with Claire, her eyes lit up. Are you serious? This is amazing. I'm so proud of you, she exclaimed, her excitement contagious, but I was quick to clarify, I want us to be on the same page. This move could bring changes for all of us and will require teamwork. I'm in, she replied without hesitation. Let's do this together. I want to support you and I want our family to thrive. With her words, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was not just about her redeeming herself or me seeking revenge. It was about creating a life we could be proud of together. The weeks flew by as we planned the move. We packed up our memories, both old and new, and I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I realized I was no longer consumed by the anger and resentment that had once clouded my judgment. Instead, I was focused on the future, on the possibilities that awaited us. On moving day, as we drove away from our old home, I felt a mix of nostalgia and relief. I took one last look at the house that had witnessed our highs and lows, then turned to Claire. Here, to new beginnings, I said, raising an imaginary glass in a toast. She smiled, her eyes sparkling with determination, and to a future filled with love and trust. In the end, I learned that life is full of unexpected turns. Betrayal can shake you to your core, but it can also act as a catalyst for growth. I discovered that while revenge might have felt good in the moment, the true victory came from rising above the pain and choosing to build something better. We still had work to do, but the journey would be ours to navigate together. I was no longer the victim of betrayal. I was a man who had faced his demons and emerged stronger. I had embraced my power, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about the future.